the idea that there's a second location where spacecraft come down. Now, the space shuttle was actually launched from the Kennedy Space Center. It landed, I believe it landed at, was it Edwards Air Force Base? Was that where it used to land? Which is, I think, California. But there was actually an emergency landing spot on the other side of the Atlantic. It was actually RAF Woodbridge in Suffolk. Yeah. The space shuttle, there was actually an emergency landing spot. The space shuttle, for some reason, had to come down on the opposite side of the Earth and in the other hemisphere. It had somewhere it could land. And I'm kind of wondering, I mean, obviously, maybe Blue or someone knows more about this, or maybe Scott, but was there similar plans for the Apollo missions?
Easter Island was also one of the emergency landing sites for the space shuttle.
There's varying documents on the first abort sequence that can happen on a Saturn V rocket, and you must be in space. They had to complete one full orbit on that's their first abort sequence that they could do for a Saturn V rocket. I have the documents on that as well. They wouldn't be in the Atlantic. The first one was Hawaii.
But it's a very curious coincidence or anomaly associated with Apollo 13.
But let's stick with anomaly, shall we? Because there are so many of them, it's going to take a lifetime to work them all out.
If everything else was fake, then presumably this was faked as well. I mean, why would someone fake a space disaster?
Was it because they preset the time that it was going to land, and someone had spotted something about the fact that, oh my God, that's on the dark side of the moon, how are we going to get out of this one? So the whole idea of having an explosion in space was a get out kind of clause.
That's what I wrote in my book, and I didn't
maybe I read it in yours.
Yeah. No, I'm not saying that that's the reason. I'm just saying that was a possible scenario that could explain why they come up with that. I mean, I threw that in there just to get the reader to think and to research. There's many other possible reasons, but there's one point that I want to bring out, and Marcus was talking about the Apollo 13 landing on the dark side of the Terminator. The counter argument to that is, well, no, they would have landed slightly on the sunlit side of the Terminator. And I'm going to be talking a little bit more about this in depth in my second book, but the official versions has Neil Armstrong and the Apollo commanders of all the 6 missions doing a visual landing. We're not talking an instrument landing here, we're talking visual.
Yeah.
And in order to have an instrument landing, you need a comparable amount of equipment on the ground as you have in your aircraft. The two have to be in sync. They have to be working in tandem. So if this was a visual landing, even the argument about, well, they were slightly on the sunlit side of the Terminator still doesn't hold any water for the simple reason, if you're on a visual landing and you're landing in very unfamiliar terrain, you've got shadows, elongated shadows, more different shadows to deal with. That would have to be factored into the lunar module simulations, and I haven't found any evidence that was factored in yet anyway. So that's another thing to keep in mind. So either argument doesn't hold water for NASA.
Trevor, you've been quite quiet. Do you want to say anything?
No, I'll make a presentation next session, I think, I mean, the first book was basically impartial. I actually believe they went to the moon. Yeah, I mean, the only thing there was the chapter 19, the smoke and mirrors videos. I couldn't find any pro-NASA people who commented on that.
I don't think any pro-NASA people have commented on it because I don't think they're even aware of it. I've not seen any comments.
Well, Blue, it's your chance. Have you heard of this?
I have not.
Some homework for you, Blue.
I think NASA has commented on it. They've been pulling it down from everywhere off the internet.
That is a type of comment, isn't it?
It's still on my site. It goes with the book, so you can still see it on my site. There was one point, Marcus, that you were discussing with Blue on that last session you had.
Yeah.
About the lunar landing sites, the coordinates.
Yeah.
And if you remember, there were many different versions. I mean, for Apollo 11, and these are all NASA figures, all NASA documents that give many different versions. And on Apollo 11, one pair is 20 kilometers apart.
Yeah.
I mean, I've still got that. But what I did find from that is that a lot of those original documents have now been deleted.
Yes, I've been trying to archive as many as possible, and then I compare them with the updated files that they're putting out.
That's interesting.
I'm just going to share my screen now. Those are the different coordinates for 11, 12, 14, 15. If you look at the sources for all these coordinates, these are all NASA, but very different versions. I mean, these two are 20 kilometers apart. I don't know how they explain this. I mean, it was a business about whether the retro reflectors could be pinpointed. And the point is, these are just so desperately different that I don't see how it's possible. We can see the figures. I mean, this 2343, 2363, that's 20 kilometers apart.
Apollo 11 was only 75 feet from the craft.
Those are the coordinates of the LEM.
I think it was Marcus was showing this. It looked like someone playing basketball.
About the gravity.
What I was describing was comparing a beach volleyball player here on Earth, and as he jumps up, you see the sand coming up with him, and as he goes down, the sand goes down as well. And Trevor compared that image to the jump salute, where the astronaut jumps up, and the sand also goes up, but then the sand goes back down again, and the astronaut's still up in the air. Because you can't put sand on bits of string and suspend them in the air as you can an astronaut.
I mean, what's happening there is the sand falls at Earth gravity or near enough. In actual fact, there's some slow motion added, but the astronaut's being still pulled up.
That's right.
With a wire. I mean, that's the.
This is based on like the acceleration in the gravitational field and things like that, which is at a fixed rate for all objects unless there's some kind of airflow time of resistance, like a parachute, like the feather and things like that. Neil, in the meantime, Neil, you've got a presentation, I believe.
Yeah, we'll get that on. Many will probably be aware of this movie. Clips from American Moon. It's important to know that the guy that made this film was an expert in photography, and he also makes his own films as well. So he knows about things like lens flare and film artifacts and things like that. Now, there's a point coming up here which makes me question, why did they make a ladder coming from the LEM if it's so easy for one of the astronauts to pull himself up the backside of the LEM using his arms? You'll see this in a second, which I was absolutely astounded to see. That looks like wise, definitely. Especially the weight of that backpack, you would fall back. Yeah, that's really getting pulled up. You can't do that.
That looks very weird, doesn't it?
Of course it looks weird. I mean, they're in a pressurized suit on the moon.
Okay.
I expect it to look weird.
It's interesting that he can't get up there, but not the same astronaut, but he pulls himself up literally the backside of the lunar module. And I don't know how much these suits weigh, and I know supposedly 1/6 of the gravity. But it makes you question, well, why did they bother putting a ladder there? Look, here, this is the sequence. Watch this guy. Look at that. Look at that. I mean, what sort of strength would you need to do that? You don't need a lunar module ladder, do you?
He looks like he's on a ladder.
Well, yeah, but that's
Watch his feet.
Yeah, but he's actually, but he's swinging from side to side. There's no ladder there because that's the back side.
Yeah, foot grips on things.
That's the back side of the lunar module.
Yeah, just look at the mess at the top with the see?
Yeah.
See up above? That is the ladder. Swinging back and forth on the wire. At one point, he doesn't even have any hands on.
Yeah. So the flap there was the thing that I was curious about. The flap where you got an astronaut dusting something like a solar panel or something on some contraption, and then he moves away, and this flap to the right of it, like a gold flap, sort of moves up and down a few times as if it's suggesting that like a breeze or something is blown on there. Any thoughts on that, Blue?
My first thought is that could easily just be the astronaut hitting it to where the astronaut's moving right out of frame. That is very zoomed in, and we can barely even tell what's happening. I wouldn't see how that could be used as evidence to show that there could be wind or anything like that. Now, possibly, yeah, there could be wind on that one bit. But what I'm saying is I don't see how that can be conclusive anyway.
Possibly wind on that one bit, you mean?
Well, yeah, like if the moon landing was fake, then that could be wind. But I don't see how that single clip can be conclusive either way, seeing that it's so zoomed in and it's so low poly, to be honest.
Scott, have you got the images of the oil on the lunar rover and kind of dust stuck to the oil with the wheel rim?
I would love to know how everybody thinks that the video was faked.
Was in like how in terms of the mechanism of the...
Yeah, like how in terms of the mechanism. I mean, if you don't know, you don't know. It's just, I just want to.
Well, it's simple. Just read the Finney file. The complete documentation of all of the practice training, everybody that's involved, the locations they were at, how they did the geological, everything right through.
And I imagine everybody on this call has a different point of view on it. There's not one single thing that you guys have all figured out.
We all have different opinions on things. Yeah.
Of course. I mean, I was just wondering, going through all you guys, is it wires? Is it slowed down footage? Is it miniatures? Mix of all of them? What is it?
They used all of it.
Scott, explain what's going on here.
What you see here is oil leaking from down here. You can see it very, very wet down here. I have no idea why they cleaned off the stripe on this spot. It's perfectly clean. You can see everything sticking here, here, and here, and you can see it spraying up the inside. And the dirt sticking to it there. It's completely covered there and there. There's other shots of the astronauts, and the back of their suits are covered with the oil as well.
Could there be an argument that it could be static that's holding the dust to the metal?
No, it looks quite different. This is the only wheel where it's wet. This is the left rear wheel, and this particular rover is used on all 3 missions because it still has the same leaky oil wheel.
I still don't see where the oil is.
Sorry, you can't see it.
Is that the black material that seems to be spattered onto the hub?
Would that not just be lunar dust?
But then how's it sticking?
Because the lunar dust is very sticky. How is it sticking to the astronaut? How is it sticking to literally everything else? Wasn't that one of the biggest problems they found?
But you can see the difference in the wheel from the front to the back. This is oil leaking out of the rear axle on here. It's spraying up.
So where's the oil coming from that's spraying out of the axle?
Right out of the center of the hub. You never driven a car before?
Yeah, axles are filled with grease, not with oil.
Right. Well, that's where it's spraying up.
No. Axles are filled
There.
with grease.
It's coming out of here. You can see where it's coming out of.
If it was lunar dust, for instance, you would get it over the central hubcap bit in the middle, but it's actually coming out from under it. If you go back to that wheel again, Scott,
Yeah.
like you say, yeah. See where you got the little bolts around the central cap in the middle? There's
Here,
nothing
and
there
it's
at all, but it's coming out from under
gooey.
it.
It's not dry. It's gooey.
Yeah. It
Okay.
looks like wet mud.
And this is a very distinctive mark on it here, where it's spraying up. You know, when I first found this, I emailed this to a couple of mechanics and I said, how much? Like, what's the problem? How much? And it was between $250 and $400 to fix my vehicle. That's what they did. They didn't even recognize it as the rover. They just thought it was a dune buggy.
Scott, where's the oil coming from if it's oil?
From the rear axle seal, right there. That is an axle seal, right there. You've never worked on a car, obviously.
Grease is in the axle. Axle grease.
Really?
Oil is in the
And what's behind that?
So you're telling me that the oil came out of the transmission?
Not out of a transmission, no.
Can you please demonstrate to me where the oil's in the axle?
Well, don't forget, on the other side of this is an electric motor.
Why
And
is there
it has
oil?
gear, and it'll probably be using 90-weight gear oil in there. Not straight grease. Not bearing grease.
Oil will usually go in the transmission.
Same oil you put in a differential.
But it would need some kind of lubrication oil. Obviously, it's an electrically powered vehicle, but it would need some kind of grease or oil. You mentioned the differential. That's got a few moving parts. There's possibly like suspension, the springs and things like that. I mean, have you ever seen anything like this on a normal car? I mean, Scott, did you say you've seen this effect before on like a dune buggy? You mentioned your mechanic said it was a dune buggy.
Yeah,
Does that actually happen on a normal car, on an Earth car?
Absolutely. Just drive a Dodge pickup truck. The rear axle seal's leaking and all like that's lubricated right through inside the casing, right through from the differential out to the outside. Then there's a seal, and then you have grease for your bearing seals. But when that breaks through, it just leaks out everywhere. If you're on the lunar surface and it's liquid, it will evaporate.
Is there any other pictures from that same mission where the wheel is clean, as if some mechanic spotted that and said, "Cut, guys, we've got to cut this. Yeah, let's get in here and let's clean this up before we carry on."
But the thing is, that's Apollo 17, and the same wheel is apparent in Apollo 16 and in Apollo 15 as well. That's the whole point. It's the same rover being used over and over again.
Is it possible that lunar dust is very sticky, and that's just the lunar dirt on the hub?
But why only that wheel then?
Slash oil or whatever.
Why only that wheel?
What do you mean why
only that wheel?
Has two.
But they're not the same. It's not anywhere near the same.
They're not the same. I drive my car through the dirt all the time, and it's not the same on the front or the back.
Right.
Why?
But the other side on the back is
I can't see the other side on the back.
Not like that.
I can't see the other side on the back.
Well, then you better take a look at the photographs and study them.
The photograph
Instead of telling me you can't see it, then take a look.
We can't actually feel it. We can't actually see it. But it's an interesting thing that Scott spotted, and it's certainly I think it's certainly one of the things that needs investigating, if possible.
Does anyone know what might be the sticky residue on moon dust? Let's say it was sticky. What would cause that to be sticky? I would have thought some kind of moisture or liquid or something, but then, as Marcus would say, should out gas.
It's a very thin oil, according to the smoke and mirrors. A very small amount of thin oil to stop the sand forming dust clouds.
And so remember that, yes, that's what gets on the suits and everything.
And the NASA position, sorry to interrupt, Ben, and the NASA position is that they're fine molecules of grain that are almost like claws on each other, and they cling to each other, and that's why they clump together. That's the NASA argument, I believe.
I've heard it said also that because of cosmic rays, there's a lot of static charge in it, which you get static cling.
One of the things that kept coming up with the lunar module, and this is when it was being built, designed, and manufactured, that they went through great lengths to make sure that the whole entire room and building, rather, was sterilized, including the suits that the technicians themselves are wearing when they're working inside and around the lunar module. Now, I'm assuming that the argument would be that the lunar module inside, the controls, the dials would have been sealed, but still, they didn't seem to be too concerned about fluffing dust all over the place and floating around inside the lunar module, which could have the potential to interfere with fly-by-wire systems. So that's just something that I'm looking into right now.
Here's the other one that I was going to show you on here. This particular image here. This is from their training schedule. Okay, and this is from Apollo 15. And this is the equipment that they were using while they were training, just while they were practicing. So they actually had 4 cameras with 4 mounts for the front of their suits on it. These are the cameras, collection bags, and stuff like that. And you come down here, and they actually have 4 PLS mock-ups. They're not the real thing, they're just to practice with. When they're practicing here on Earth, you can't have a super heavy suit. You cannot have a 180-pound suit on an astronaut when he's practicing on Earth. This is located at Flagstaff where they were doing this practice, and it was chosen over top of any of the other locations. It's at 7,000 feet, and it's a much cooler environment, and they're going to be overheated in the suits when they're doing a full simulation. So they actually made a suit that was much lighter. The PLS mock-ups, basically all they had in them was a couple of cooling fans and a little battery and the radio set with their antenna. That's all they had in them to lighten them up. They had extra batteries, and they always had 2 rover-type vehicles on every set when they were using it, and that's what I'm showing the multiple rover tracks. Because the same thing that they were doing in their practice were the actual final simulations. This is what they took out when they were just training, but this is exactly what you see in a final simulation. The 4 PLS mock-ups are right there, right? They're not the real thing. All of the experimental equipment were just mock-ups to practice with. They weren't functional pieces of equipment. And right down at the bottom, they always had 2 rovers with them, just while they were doing the practice. That's exactly what you see in the final simulation. In the actual photographs that they claim are the final simulations are just shots from when they were practicing.
Are there 2 rovers, Scott? I mean, like you mentioned, they reuse rovers. Are there 2 rovers in each simulation? I'm like in the final, what we
They were only supposed to have one with them. They were hand-built machines, so even the tracks are different. And if you watch any of my videos, you'll see that there are multiple rovers. Even the frames are built differently. But they also had 4 PLSs, mock-ups.
Okay.
They're just covered over pieces of aluminum. They couldn't possibly. There's absolutely no possible way you're going to run around with 180 pounds of equipment on just to practice it. Not in Earth's gravity. That pack alone is well over 100 pounds. You wouldn't be able to bend over and pick anything else up, right? The entire stuff weighs as much as them. And if you read the Finney file, which I keep saying that you got to read the Finney file, it is an extensive file on the training. It shows where they went for the geological rock locations. From Antarctica, they're in Nevada, Arizona, California. There's even a cinder lake in California. Schooner cone, and it gives you the date, the time, the number of people that were there, the purpose that they were going to that location for. It has like all the dates, times, everything are in that file.
So the final result of what you're talking about, what we call the Apollo visual record, was actually done on these very missions. So it was created on these missions.
Those were their training missions. It even shows how they selected Flagstaff as the final location. And it's because it had the right type of soil. Houston wanted it. They couldn't get it. It was far too warm there. They didn't have the right location or the right soil conditions to do the simulations. So when Flagstaff was chosen, they blasted out the craters and did the moonscape there. They also built Hadley Rill on that location to practice.
So they shot it outside.
They're shooting outdoor for a good portion of it. They had indoor simulations for lunar orbit, lunar landings.
Yeah.
All of those things were done on the other simulators. All of that equipment was there. They had a 120-foot high gantry crane, 300 feet by 600 feet long, to simulate the landings, and you can even see the videos on that.
How do you account for the inverse square?
What are you talking about?
The inverse square law. How do you account for that? This is not gravity. This is lighting. That if something is twice as far away, it's 4 times dimmer.
Because they're using miniature sets.
They're using outdoor sets.
Doesn't matter.
Yeah, it does matter. It absolutely matters.
Go to Daytona.
There's many, many lights. If you look at the ground at Daytona,
exactly. There you go. Jeez.
There's a bunch of shadows.
How did you figure that out? They can light it up. Maddox,
oh my God!
Go get an education. Have you read any of it? None of it. You haven't even watched my videos.
If this was artificial lighting, it's a valid question.
If he wants to talk about lighting, he can read about it.
If there was like one single light, then maybe what Blue said is valid. But maybe there was more than one light. Maybe it was a large spotlight, like at a race, like a motor racing circuit, like you said. Okay. Or maybe there were like reflector boards. I mean, Marcus, maybe you can bring. Of course.
All right. So the reason why we pretty much know it can't be one single light is because they don't make lights big enough that can go as far out as we see in the pictures. We see the sets go on very far, extremely far, hundreds of meters in the back. And now you can say that's a miniature. Okay, then that can be a miniature. Or if there could be a backdrop, okay, there could be a backdrop. Please demonstrate how there's a backdrop. But if there's a one single light, then there has to be a drop off in that light. When you shoot movies, the whole reason why you shoot a movie outdoors for many scenes that you could shoot in a studio is because you have the one giant light. Nothing can beat that light, and that's the sun. That's one of the first things they teach you when you film anything. You can't beat the light of the sun because the sun lights everything up pretty darn evenly. That's why you want to shoot on an overcast, by the way. When you shoot in a studio, rarely will you ever use a single light to light something up. And that's because you can't light everything with a single light in a studio. You have to have multiple lights because none of them are powerful enough to simulate the sun. Now they can for a very small scene, for like a very small set, but if you want to take the entire studio set, you have to use a bunch of things. And that's why in movies you rarely see the ground. In movies you see a lot of stuff up. You don't really see the ground much. And if you do see the ground, then that's because there's a separate light that is behind the actors shooting on the ground.
You do. I mean, in some movies you do, though, Blue. I mean, like in Stanley Kubrick's 2001, you see like a location which is a studio set of the moon, which is actually not unlike what you see in Apollo.
No, it's very unlike. If you actually look at the difference between the two, they don't look anything similar. This 2001 Space Odyssey's moon set is not very good, to be honest. Now, it looks good on film, but it's nowhere near realistic.
Okay, Scott, you have a reply for this?
Just look at the photographs. Look at the fallout. Look at the hot spots. These photographs. I don't need to discuss it. You sit there and tell me all of this stuff.
Yeah,
look at the fallout.
So the lighting effect you see here, Scott, is what? I mean, is this you can see here that this is studio lights?
I mean, I've discussed this with Robert, I don't know how many times, okay? And that's what he did for a living. Outdoor scenes.
One sec, Blue, one sec. So the lighting effect's not even over this landscape, is that what you're saying, Scott?
If that's sunlight, then it would be even. And he just said that himself. I'm just showing you the photographs just in these large bitmaps, and you can see the fallout. Look at the fallout. Look at the hot spots.
Okay, Marcus, do you have anything to add to this? Because this is your speciality.
Well, yes. I mean, one point I would make about that, on some of those photographs, you see what appears to be the sun appearing in the image itself.
Yeah, here and here.
There we go. But that is not how the sun would appear when photographed on photographic film. That is a large light rather than the sun. It's masquerading as the sun, and we assume it is the sun because this is taken on the moon. But if you actually examine the center of that white circle, you'll see a filament from a bulb, which indicates that there were certain pictures taken using artificial light. Now, we've got no idea what the scale of those pictures are. It could be 1.5 miles because that's the horizon on the lunar surface. We've got no idea what the scale is. So it's very hard to actually work it out. All of this was worked out well in advance on the film scripts, which were written in advance. They're called the press packs. They were all done to the nearest second, which is a very suspicious timing. That's what they intended to do. But the Apollo missions didn't carry black boxes, so we don't know what actually happened. We can only assume that NASA are telling us the truth, which I rather doubt because so many errors have crept into their storylines. But yeah, I mean, what Blue is saying about the fall off of light is perfectly correct. If you're using an artificial light, it will fall off. The sun will not fall off. Sunlight is so powerful that there's no way it will fall off. Anybody looking at these would say, yes, there appears to be fall off in some of these pictures, which shouldn't happen if it's being illuminated by the sun. If it's being illuminated by an artificial light, yes, you will get fall off. And some of it is rather more obvious than others. And you can say, well, you can tell what size the astronaut is, so you know how big the picture is. But how do we know it's the real astronaut and not a miniature? These are some of the problems that keep arising with analyzing Apollo. It was a very sophisticated exercise in creating the Apollo archive. Very sophisticated. A lot of work went into it. My view is that it was done at Lookout Mountain Laboratories in California. The interior shots were done at the same place that Tom Hanks filmed From the Earth to the Moon, Menlo Park, near San Francisco. And some of those images, which we know were taken here on Earth, appear to show a very good facsimile of what we have seen the Apollo images allegedly taken on the moon. It's very easy to say, well, of course they were taken on the moon. You can tell, look, it's all a weird, the moon surface is very reflective. Yes, it is reflective. 8% is what it reflects. Not a great deal. But then you have to take into account the ability of photographic film to record that amount of light in relation to all the other levels of light in the same scene. And that's why most photographers will use fill-in flash, fill-in lights or reflectors. On the moon, there weren't any of these.